The soft hum of the jet engines buzzed beneath the quiet sophistication of the first-class cabin. Velvet drapes divided the elite from the rest, and the clink of crystal glasses mingled with the rustle of silk shirts and tailored suits. It was the kind of silence that had its own class code, polite, aloof, and brimming with unspoken rules. Among the 6 passengers already seated, one man in his late 50s adjusted his Rolex as if it were a badge. Martin Rothschild, a venture capitalist from Connecticut, had made his fortune flipping companies and burning bridges. He always boarded early, not just for comfort, but for the privilege of sizing up who dared share his airspace. That's when the last first-class passenger stepped in. A tall black man wearing a black hoodie, sunglasses and jeans. Casual, calm, and seemingly unimpressed by the exclusivity of it all. No entourage, no Louis Vuitton, just presence. He didn't look around for approval. He knew where he was. Going? Seat 2A. Martin's eyes narrowed. He whispered loud enough for the attendant and others to hear. Looks like security let a coach flyer wander up here. A few passengers glanced up, unsure whether to laugh or cringe. The flight attendant, a young woman named Alana, stiffened, but the man in the hoodie didn't flinch. He simply removed his sunglasses, placed them into his pocket, and sat down. "Excuse me," Martin continued, leaning across the aisle now. "This cabin is reserved. You might want to check your ticket." The man turned his head slowly. His eyes met Martin's, calm and unwavering, no flash of anger, just silence, heavy, unmovable. He didn't reply. Not yet. Alana stepped in, her voice formal but tight. "Sir, this is Mr. Jackson. He's a confirmed first-class passenger." Martin scoffed. "Jackson? What, is he a rapper or something?" From row 3, a woman's jaw dropped. Her teenage son elbowed her hard, whispering, "Mom, that's Samuel L. Jackson." But Martin wasn't paying attention. He leaned back smugly, chuckling to himself. "Right, and I'm Morgan Freeman." The man in 2A exhaled slowly, then finally spoke. His voice was gravel and thunder, calm yet coated with history. "You ever hear the phrase, 'Don't judge a book by its cover, especially when you can't read'?" A ripple of tension moved through the cabin like a cold wind. Martin laughed again, louder this time, trying to turn the moment into a comedy sketch only he was invited to. "Oh, now the man's quoting fortune cookies. That's cute." The surrounding passengers exchanged uneasy glances. A few tried to bury their heads in newspapers or tablets, unwilling to engage. Some smiled nervously, more out of discomfort than agreement. But Martin was riding a wave of arrogance too strong to notice the current changing around him. "Look, I don't care who you think he is," Martin said to Alana. "First class isn't just about money, it's about standards. We're trying to keep a certain caliber here." Alana's professional smile cracked just slightly. "Mr. Jackson has every right to be here, sir. Please lower your voice." But Martin wasn't done. This is what happens when you sell seats based on celebrity instead of class. One movie and suddenly everyone thinks they're royalty. A sharp intake of breath came from the row behind. A middle-aged woman in pearls whispered to her husband, "That's Samuel L. Jackson. He's not just an actor. He's something else." "Still," Martin pressed on, "next thing you know, they'll let TikTok influencers in here just for going viral dancing with a dog." Samuel didn't move. He stared out the window, his reflection caught in the glass like a portrait of patience under siege. But his silence only made Martin more uncomfortable and more aggressive. "What cat got your tongue?" Martin barked. "Or are you waiting for someone to write your comeback for you?" That's when the pilot's voice came over the intercom. A brief note about turbulence expected over Chicago. It did little to settle the tension brewing in the air. Alana knelt by Samuel's seat, lowering her voice to a respectful whisper. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Jackson. Would you like to move to a more private seat? We can speak with the captain if—" Samuel shook his head slowly. "I'm not moving, not because of him. He's not the turbulence, just hot air." It was the first time anyone chuckled, a deep, unexpected laugh from the teen boy 2 rows back. Then a few more followed, restrained but real. The temperature of the cabin shifted. Martin flushed. "You think you're funny now?" Samuel finally turned fully toward him. No smile, just clarity. You're talking to a man who's been through more airports, more back doors, and more frontline protests than you've seen suits in your closet. And the funny part is, you still have no idea who you're talking to. The silence this time was thick. No one moved. Even the pilot's next intercom update paused, as if the plane itself was holding its breath. The air didn't just feel different, it was different. The shift wasn't loud or theatrical, it was something more primal, like the moment just before a storm when animals go silent and the wind holds its breath. That's what Samuel L. Jackson brought into that cabin. Not noise, not volume, just wait. He leaned back in his seat with deliberate slowness, folding his arms. His gaze never returned to Martin. That part was over. Now he simply existed, and that was enough to challenge every assumption that had just been spit into the air. Passengers who'd stayed quiet before now found themselves adjusting their seats. Someone slid their phone to silent. Another lowered her wine glass. The quiet had texture now, not one of comfort, but of respect and tension. And something else they couldn't name. Martin tried to regain the rhythm he'd lost. "You're not intimidating anyone," he muttered. "This isn't a movie." Samuel didn't answer. He didn't need to. His silence had become its own monologue. In that space, everything spoke. The years of hard-won dignity. The battles against being underestimated. The command of a man who'd stood beside both legends and ghosts. The teenage boy, still stealing glances, finally worked up the nerve to speak. "Sir, are you really Samuel L. Jackson?" Samuel turned, slow as ever, and gave the kid a nod. Just that. And in return, the boy's face lit up like a struck match. "Dude, you're my dad's favorite actor. He made me watch Pulp Fiction and Coach Carter in the same weekend." That earned the first real smile from Samuel, not wide, but true. "Smart dad," he said. A ripple of laughter spread again, warmer this time, the kind that says a space is healing. But then Martin's voice slithered back in. "So what? He's just an actor. You people worship these celebrities like they're gods." And that's when Samuel moved, not fast, not loud, but deliberate. He stood up, not in a rage, but in total control. He adjusted the collar of his hoodie, took a step into the aisle and turned, not toward Martin, but toward the cabin. The whole cabin. "I'm not here to be worshipped," he said, voice low but sharp. "I'm here because I paid for this seat like anybody else. But I've also paid for it 1,000 other ways, in rooms where I wasn't welcome, on screens where I had to scream to be heard, and in moments like this, where silence isn't enough." Now it was Martin who looked small. Smaller than his seat. Smaller than his words. Samuel stood tall in the narrow aisle, his presence suddenly towering over everyone. Not because of height, but because the truth had found a voice, and it spoke with purpose. No shouting, no theatrics, just a calm, controlled fury that demanded to be heard. Martin shifted in his seat, discomfort crawling over him like ants. "You really going to lecture me now? On a plane? About class?" Samuel's eyes locked on him, but his voice remained for everyone. "You started this, not because you didn't know who I was, but because you thought you did, and more importantly, you thought I didn't belong." A hush fell again. The pilot said nothing. The attendants stood still. The entire cabin leaned in without realizing it. Samuel stepped closer. "You think money buys class? No, man. Class is when you look around a room and see people, not possessions. Class is when you know you could say something cruel and choose not to. Class is how you treat folks when nobody's watching, and even more when everybody is." Martin tried to laugh it off. "Save it for your next movie, preacher." But the words fell flat. No one was laughing anymore. Even the pearl-clad woman who'd once shifted uncomfortably now looked at Martin with cold disappointment. Samuel didn't blink. "You know what the funny thing is? I wasn't even going to say a word. I was going to enjoy this flight, read a script, drink a ginger ale, and be done. But you needed an audience. You needed to prove something, and now here you are." Martin looked around, now realizing no one was on his side. The cabin that once echoed with his voice now stared at him with something worse than anger, quiet judgment. Samuel took one step back, giving the moment room to breathe. "Let me ask you this, Mr. Standards," he said, his voice cool. What exactly did you think made you better? The watch, the suit, the smirk? Martin opened his mouth, but no answer came. Samuel raised an eyebrow. Exactly. Then he turned slowly, returning to seat 2A with the kind of composure that no man can fake. Before sitting, he said one last thing, not to Martin, but to the cabin. Respect doesn't cost anything, but withholding it, that'll bankrupt your soul. And with that, he sat down. The silence afterward was no longer awkward. It was sacred. As the plane cruised at 36,000 feet, the tension began to settle, but it didn't vanish. It lingered like the residue of something rotting just beneath a polished surface. Martin had gone silent, but the damage had been done. Not to Samuel. To the illusion of civility that first-class cabins tried so hard to maintain. Samuel sat seemingly calm, but his fingers tapped a slow rhythm on the armrest, not from agitation, but calculation. He'd seen this scene before, too many times. In boardrooms, on red carpets, in restaurants, on sidewalks, and yes, in cabins like this where power hid behind pressed suits and half-smiles. The teen boy leaned over to his mother. "Why'd that guy act like that, just 'cause he's rich?" Samuel heard him. He turned slightly enough to meet the boy's eyes. "No, kid. He acted like that because no one ever told him he was wrong and made it stick." A quiet murmur passed through the cabin. Then a voice came from row 4, a woman in her 70s traveling alone. "It happens more often than people think," she said. "I've seen flight attendants cry in back rooms. I've seen people moved from first class just because they looked like they didn't belong." Alana, the flight attendant, turned toward her with a nod. Her voice came out softer this time. "It's true. It happens. And we're told to stay professional to avoid escalating anything." Samuel looked at her. "Which means tolerating it day after day, smile and keep it moving." She nodded. That's when another passenger chimed in, a tech executive from San Francisco, judging by his laptop and Patagonia vest. "Honestly, I've done it too. Not like him," he added quickly, "but I've made assumptions about people. I just didn't say it out loud." Samuel gave him a look that was both stern and understanding. "That's the thing. Silence is just racism in its dress clothes." Now, the cabin wasn't just listening, it was reflecting. Samuel leaned forward. "This isn't about one man saying something dumb. This is about a culture that teaches folks they own space, that their money, their job, their skin makes them more entitled to comfort, to respect. That's the wound. And we keep dressing it with upgrades and fancy wine, hoping no one smells. The infection." Even Martin, now hunched in his seat, couldn't escape the weight of those words. He looked straight ahead, face pale as if for the first time he was seeing himself through someone else's eyes, and not liking what stared back. The silence around Martin grew louder than any insult he had thrown earlier. Every eye in the cabin seemed to rest on him now, not with anger, but with a cold, surgical clarity. There was no place to hide, no audience left to impress. The theater of arrogance had closed, and all that remained was the truth, raw and echoing. He adjusted his tie unnecessarily, cleared his throat and reached for the flight attendant button, a small, desperate motion, as if clinging to protocol would restore the control he'd lost. Alana approached, her posture straight, her expression unreadable. "I'd like a whiskey," Martin muttered. She didn't blink. "Of course, sir. Neat or with ice?" He paused. "Neat." As she turned to go, Martin glanced across the aisle at Samuel, who had resumed his seat, flipping through a screenplay. His calm now seemed like a force field, unbreakable, indifferent to the attempts to provoke him. Martin leaned over slightly. "Listen, I didn't mean to—" Samuel didn't look up. "Yeah, you did. You just didn't expect the spotlight to turn back on you." That hit deeper than Martin expected. Across the aisle, the woman with pearls suddenly spoke up. "What's your name again?" she asked Martin. He looked surprised. Martin Rothschild." Her eyebrows lifted. "Of Rothschild Dynamics." A few murmurs began. One passenger pulled out his phone, discreetly searching the name. Headlines popped up: aggressive takeovers, layoffs, lawsuits. Martin Rothschild wasn't just arrogant, he was a symbol of ruthless capitalism. His empire had destroyed jobs, gutted pensions, and walked away with golden parachutes. "I knew you looked familiar," the woman said. "You closed the factory in Lexington. My brother lost his job after 22 years. More murmurs. More. Phones lit up. Alana returned with his drink, but now even her movements had changed. Polite but stripped of the earlier deference. Martin took the glass with trembling hands. "This is ridiculous," he whispered. "I'm not the villain here." Samuel looked up at last. "Then stop acting like one." There it was, the final crack in the mask. Martin slumped back, defeated, not just by Samuel, but by the unrelenting exposure of his true self. For the first time in decades, he wasn't the man at the top of the ladder. He was just a man, seen, judged, and found lacking. Samuel folded the script in his lap and stood once more, but this time not in anger, in resolution. He wasn't here to humiliate Martin further. That had already happened. This was about something else now, something bigger. He turned toward Alana. "Do you have a few minutes?" She blinked. "Yes, Mr. Jackson. I'd like to speak with the captain." There was a pause, a flicker of confusion, then understanding. She nodded and disappeared toward the cockpit. Passengers leaned toward the aisle, curious, uncertain. Martin stared down at his untouched whiskey, clearly bracing for another verbal blow, but Samuel didn't face him. He addressed the cabin. "I don't usually do this," he began, "but this isn't usual. I'm tired of letting these moments pass without action. It's one thing to speak truth. It's another to build something with it." The cockpit door opened. The captain, a middle-aged black woman with grey streaks in her hair, stepped out. "Mr. Jackson?" He greeted her with a respectful nod. "Ma'am, I'd like to buy every flight attendant on this crew a round-trip ticket to anywhere in the world, first class." Gasps echoed. The captain blinked. "Sir, are you?" "Sure," Samuel nodded, "I'm sure. They deal with this nonsense every day, and they do it with grace. That deserves more than a thank you." He turned back to Alana. "And you stood firm today. You did your job with dignity. I want to cover the cost of your student loans. I have a contact at the foundation that can make it happen. You're done owing anyone anything." Alana's hand shot to her mouth. She tried to speak, failed, then just let the tears fall. Even Martin looked up now, speechless, shrinking deeper into his seat. Samuel wasn't finished. "To everyone else here," he said, "I'm not asking you to cancel this man. I'm asking you to cancel this mindset, that some lives matter more based on money, skin, or spotlight. That ends where you decide it ends. A standing ovation would have felt cheap. What filled the cabin instead was reverence. Heads nodding slowly, some with misty eyes, others just thinking. Deeply. The teen boy whispered, "This is better than any movie." Samuel cracked a grin. "That's 'cause this one's real." 2 weeks had passed since that flight. Enough time for 100 headlines to rise and fall in the news cycle. But this story didn't fade. It grew. The moment had been recorded discreetly by the teenager seated 2 rows back. It wasn't planned. There was no clickbait title or viral dance, just truth captured in 1080p. When he posted the clip, it spread like wildfire. Samuel L. Jackson confronts first-class racism and turns it into justice. Millions watched. Not because it was scandalous, but because it was right. Alana's life changed almost overnight. Offers flooded in, airlines wanting to feature her in training videos, non-profit organizations highlighting her poise. But it wasn't the attention that mattered. It was the call from the foundation Samuel had mentioned. A quiet woman named Diane spoke on the phone. "Mr. Jackson gave us your name. We'll be covering the rest of your education. Fully. You'll graduate debt-free." Alana sat in her small apartment that night, staring at her ceiling, letting the words sink in. Not just the financial freedom, but the dignity. Someone had seen her, really seen her, and decided she was worth investing in. At the same time, the airline issued a subtle but pointed policy shift. New anti-discrimination guidelines, direct reporting channels for abuse, and, quietly, an invitation for Samuel L. Jackson to speak at their leadership conference. He declined. This wasn't about a company, he told his agent. It was about people. Let them speak. The teenage boy who'd filmed the moment found himself interviewed by national networks. He didn't brag. He just told the story over and over, ending every time with the same line: "I learned more in 2 hours at 36,000 feet than I did in a whole semester." And as for Martin Rothschild, his firm issued a bland statement. He went dark on social media. But what stung more than any PR fallout was the mirror that moment had held up to him, and how long he was now forced to live with his own reflection. It came during an interview he hadn't planned to give. He was stepping out of a charity event in Atlanta when a reporter caught up with him. "Mr. Jackson, do you have anything to say about the incident on the flight? The video's gone viral." He paused. The cameras turned toward him. Phones were raised. Flashlights blinked to life. And in the stillness of that moment, Samuel did what he always did best. He told the truth. He looked directly into the lens. No script, no sound bites, just gravel and soul. "You know, people think respect is some luxury item, something you hand out only when it benefits you, when someone looks or talks like you, but it's not. Respect is the floor, not the ceiling. It's the minimum price of being human." He let that settle for a moment. When you deny someone dignity, you're not proving power, you're proving emptiness, the kind that money can't fill and titles can't hide. You don't have to like everybody, but you damn sure better recognize that everybody matters. He pointed gently to the camera. "And let me say it clear, respect doesn't cost anything, but withholding it, that'll bankrupt your soul." The clip aired that night. It was clipped, memed, quoted, and printed, not because it was catchy, but because it felt like truth. It became the mantra of the moment, the quote on classroom walls, the signature at the bottom of emails, and the caption under a million reposts. It wasn't just Samuel L. Jackson speaking, it was the voice of a world trying, struggling, to remember what decency looked like. The clip didn't just go viral, it ignited something. Within days, educators began using it in classrooms to discuss race, class, and power dynamics. Corporate trainers added it to diversity modules. Airline staff across the country spoke of it in break rooms. But more than that, people, ordinary people, started telling their own stories of dignity denied and reclaimed. Alana, now, free from the burden of debt, launched a small podcast with a simple name, The Aisle Between Us. She used it to share stories from airline crews, janitors, bus drivers, and waitresses, voices so often talked over. Her first guest? The ECOD teenage boy from row 4. Her second? Her pilot who once got demoted for speaking out against discrimination. As for Samuel, he didn't milk the moment. He didn't start a foundation or run a campaign. He just kept doing what he always did, showing up when it mattered, where it mattered. And on one random Tuesday in a quiet cafe in Detroit, a man stepped in wearing a Rolex and a suit. He ordered a coffee, sat down, and quietly pulled out a notepad. The barista recognized him, not from a screen, but from that flight. It was Martin Rothschild. He didn't ask for attention, he just listened and wrote. Later, he would issue an open letter, not to defend himself, not to beg for redemption, but to acknowledge plainly, sometimes it takes being exposed to finally see yourself. The world didn't applaud, but it noticed, and in living rooms, schools, and subway platforms the phrase remained. Not just a quote, a compass. Respect doesn't cost anything, but withholding it, that'll bankrupt your soul. And so the story lived on, not in the noise of fame, but in the quiet of changed hearts. Not a movie, not a meme, but a legacy.